A very Hollywood narcissist. This video is about the convicted sex offender Harvey Weinstein. I originally wrote about him in October 2017 when the original allegations concerning his behaviour and conduct arose. Accordingly, it pays to revisit that material as it provides a very useful breakdown and insight with regard to his behaviours. And thereafter, I'm going to add to it, including events that have occurred since 2017. Back in October 2017, Weinstein faced a slew of accusations ranging from inappropriate attempts at engaging in sexual interaction with women through to sexual assaults and rape. At the time, more than 30 accusers came forward. That number rose to 80. Weinstein fled Los Angeles by private jet to the $40,000 a month The Meadows Rehabilitation Facility in Arizona. This is the assertion of control by withdrawal. He departs from the hotbed of the allegations, unable to assert control over the nature of the allegations and people in effect gossiping about him, and therefore he removed himself. In his world, from the narcissistic perspective, he believes that he then has control, in his unconscious, of course. The mainstream media at the time bandied around phrases referring to him seeking treatment for sex addiction, that he was a sexual predator, that he'd abused his considerable power as a Hollywood producer. But at the time, as ever, one word was consistently missing: narcissist. What did his accusers say about him, and how did all of that link to him being a narcissist? The French actress Léa Seydoux stated, "We were talking on the sofa when he suddenly jumped on me and tried to kiss me. I had to defend myself. He's big and fat, so I had to be forceful to resist him. I left his room thoroughly disgusted. I wasn't afraid of him, though, because I knew what kind of man he was all along." Weinstein's behaviour in this instance demonstrates a sense of entitlement, no boundary recognition, the attempt to manipulate sexually, an absence of emotional empathy for how a young woman would feel suddenly being treated in this manner. It demonstrates the manipulative use of his power. He was, at the time, a very powerful producer in Hollywood, and felt through this sense of entitlement, this allowed him to manipulate the individual for the purpose of a direct assertion of control and the extraction of fuel by sexually assaulting her. The American actress Heather Graham alleged that Weinstein tried to force himself on her and told her his wife would have been fine with it. This is, again, poor boundary recognition, lack of emotional empathy for both Heather Graham and Weinstein's then wife, triangulation. Graham said he could sleep with whomever he wanted when he was out of town. I walked out of the meeting feeling uneasy. There was no explicit mention that to star in one of those films I had to sleep with him, but the subtext was there. Bribery, blackmail, as part of the assertion of control. Again, there is a huge sense of entitlement towards Ms. Graham, but also with the perception that he could sleep with whoever he wanted. This evidences magical thinking. In Weinstein's unconscious, notwithstanding that he's an absolute ugly pig of a man, he believed that all of these glamorous, beautiful women wanted to sleep with him, and they should do so. There was a failure to observe boundaries and a lack of accountability. Not only did he not see or care that there might have been a repercussion for such an unwanted advance, he went even further and stated that his wife would have been fine with it. Note also the suggestion of subtext referred to by Miss Graham, which evidences the plausible deniability that narcissists so often engage in. Had Ms. Graham complained at the time, Weinstein would of course deny the accusation, pointing out that it was just the word of some crazed wannabe young actress and would have asserted control over her by smearing her to other people. Undoubtedly, he would have then sought to ruin her career, demonstrating the desire to assert control over an appliance and the application of punishment, since Ms. Graham would be painted black for her treachery, even though Weinstein was clearly the one in the wrong. Model and actress Zoe Brooke says that she was brought back to Weinstein's hotel under false pretenses in the south of France in 1997. It isn't clear whether it was Weinstein or another who applied the false pretenses, but either way, that was a further indicator of the narcissist at work. Lies have been told, manipulation has been applied to assert control, and has either been done by Weinstein himself or through a lieutenant on his behalf. Brock explained that Weinstein emerged naked from another part of the suite and asked for a massage. Once again, no boundary recognition and a sense of entitlement, plus the lack of emotional empathy for the individual who has been placed in this situation. I didn't want to do that, she explained, and he asked if he could give me a massage. I didn't know what to do, and I felt that letting him maybe touch me a little might placate him enough to get me out of there somehow. Before long, Ms. Brock fled into the bathroom. Weinstein banged on the door with his fists, eventually retreating, putting on a dressing gown, and starting to cry. Note he sought to assert control over her directly by banging on the door, an aggressive step. She resisted and gave no answer and no admittance. This wounded Weinstein. His narcissism caused him to withdraw to avoid the wounding, and then, as a further attempt to assert control, he started to cry, doling out a pity play for the purposes of seeking to assert control over Ms. Brock by causing her to feel sympathetic for him. When Brock fled, that was an act which wounded Weinstein. Her removing herself from him signaled to him that he wasn't important, that his control wasn't complete, and therefore he was wounded. His initial response was one of ignited fury as he banged on the door with his fists, but this clearly drew no response from Ms. Brock, and more importantly, no fuel, so his fuel levels dropped. He was then forced to retreat, applying the third assertion of control, and with his fuel levels being depleted by the wounding and the lack of any additional fueling appliances nearby, he then had to try and assert control through another means and gain fuel. Withdrawal was the only option to begin with, but then, unsettled by his unconscious plummeting fuel levels and the risk of further wounding, his self-defense mechanism shifted and caused him to begin to cry. Of course, he was actually crying for himself as a consequence of the construct now starting to fall apart. His narcissism caused him to attempt to manipulate Miss Brock by way of a pity play, in the hope that this would lure her into being sympathetic and thus provide fuel to him and control. Italian actress and director Asia Argentino's first dealing with Weinstein's company Miramax was when she appeared in their crime drama Bee Monkey. She says she was left alone with him in a hotel room on the French Riviera after being told she was going to a Miramax party. Argento says she reluctantly agreed to give him a massage, but he then raped her. She said, "Weinstein terrified me, and he was so big," she said. "It wouldn't stop. It was a nightmare. I know he's crushed a lot of people before. That's why this story, in my case, is 20 years old. Some of them are old, has never come out." Argento hadn't spoken out until October 2017, explaining that she feared that it would ruin her career to do so. Once again, he exhibited a sense of entitlement, a lack of boundary recognition, a lack of emotional empathy, the assertion of manipulations to bring about control, the drawing of fuel, the lies about the true intention, and the threat of repercussion. Note that Miss Argento refers to being aware that it crushed a lot of people before. Therefore, not only has this behaviour been systematic, further supported by the many revelations which have since come forward, but it also exhibits the control that Weinstein exerted over people, and as you know, control over everything is something that a narcissist must have. Mira Sorvino appeared in several of Weinstein's films, and has said that he actually sexually harassed her and tried to pressure her into having a physical relationship. She was in a hotel room with him at the Toronto International Film Festival in 1995. Ms. Sorvino explained that he started massaging my shoulders, which made me very uncomfortable, and then tried to get more physical, sort of chasing me around. Weeks later, she alleges he turned up to her apartment under the guise of having marketing ideas for the film. I opened the door terrified, brandishing my 20-pound Chihuahua mix in front of me, as though that would do any good. She told Weinstein her new boyfriend was on the way round, after which he apparently became dejected and left. Once more, there is a sense of entitlement, lack of boundary recognition, absence of empathy for how the victim of his behaviour would feel, a lack of accountability for his actions, manipulation and lying. Ms. Sorvino's comment about her new boyfriend being on his way around amounted to challenge fuel. She was rejecting him and threatening his control by explaining that she preferred somebody else. A greater narcissist would also be challenged by such a comment, would have kept the ignited fury in check and pressed on regardless, confident in his ability to charm and coerce to achieve the desired outcome. Weinstein, however, was challenged, and his narcissism anticipated further challenges or wounding. His dejection was an attempt to garner sympathy from Ms. Sorvino, to gain fuel to address the situation and also to assert control. It failed, and once again, his narcissism selected withdrawal as a method of asserting control. The scale of the allegations back in 2017 covered not just actresses, but those who worked in the various echelons of his company. Various workers at the Weinstein Film Company have reported their unpleasant experiences dealing with Weinstein, and this included Emily Nestor, who was a temporary front desk assistant who explained that she had had to refuse the advances of Weinstein on at least a dozen occasions. This evidenced his sense of omnipotence and power, that he believed everybody was available to him, and underlined his grandiosity. He can pick whoever he wants, and they'd better give him what he wants. Otherwise, he would punish them. Weinstein is clearly of the somatic cadre, as his modus operandi to gaining fuel and asserting control over appliances is through repeated and extensive sexual overtures. Of course, people not understanding narcissism will dress this up as being a sex addict, but it minces a fundamental point. Yes, he is an addict, but he's addicted to control and fuel, just as all of our kind are. But, as a somatic narcissist, he uses sex as a major method of gaining this fuel and control. Of course, Weinstein would have sucked up all of the fuel at the lavish parties that he threw, the glamorous ceremonies that he attended, revelling in the applause and adulation from tertiary sources, non-intimate secondary sources, friend, family and colleagues, but he wanted the more potent fuel from those he sought to make his intimate partner secondary sources. He had his wife, of course, as the intimate partner primary source, who was in the cycle of devaluation and respite period, but through these various acts of infidelity, she was being devalued, and we don't know what other behaviours that she had to endure. She, of course, has since divorced him. The money, the glamour, the parties, the beautiful people, etc., all fit within Weinstein belonging to the somatic cadre. He's not a physically attractive man, however, overweight, out of shape, small piggy eyes, and a face that wouldn't look lost on the loser of a boxing bout. But of course, to some somatic narcissists, these physical shortcomings are not a problem. First of all, the delusional nature of his narcissism will have told him that he was an Adonis and irresistible to these people, and as more and more victims piled up, this reinforced his notion of him being such a magnet for women. Secondly, of course, there was his unconscious manipulative behaviour. He also had the power to make or break people's careers, and, as a hugely influential force, indeed, it was reported that when it came to an analysis of Academy Award acceptance speeches from 1966 to 2016, Weinstein had been thanked or praised in 34 speeches, as many times as God, and second only to Steven Spielberg, with 43 mentions. This, of course, demonstrates the considerable power and influence that he wielded, and he will have utilised that for the purpose of asserting control over people. One does not have to have the looks of Brad Pitt to be of the somatic cadre. So, the evidence from his accusers, and plenty more was of course provided thereafter, all supported the fact that he was a narcissist. He would exhibit a sense of entitlement. He lacked emotional empathy. There was no sense of accountability. He exhibits grandiosity, at times haughty behaviours. He's manipulative, engaging in a range of manipulations, which included being physically overbearing, sexual assault, threat, pity plays, triangulation, verbal tirade, bullying, promised gain, promised loss. He also demonstrated that he had no boundary recognition, believing that he could go where he wanted, whenever he wanted to, in order to achieve control and fuel. Of course, all of this occurring in his unconscious. He also demonstrated substantial aspects of the narcissistic dynamic with regard to objectification, compartmentalization, the demonstration of a need to assert control, the need for fuel, exhibiting a response to a perceived threat to his control, haughtiness, smearing, the use of an extensive fuel matrix, all of which supports that he is indeed a narcissist. But back in 2017, what did Mr. Weinstein have to say to the allegations? First of all, let's look at the statement that was issued on his behalf. His spokesman, Sally Hoffmeister, issued a statement in response to the allegations of sexual harassment and assault, which stated, "Any allegations of non-consensual sex are unequivocally denied by Mr. Weinstein." Mr. Weinstein has further confirmed that there were never any acts of retaliation against any women for refusing his advances. Mr. Weinstein obviously can't speak to anonymous allegations, but with respect to any women who had made allegations on the record, Mr. Weinstein believes that all of these relationships were consensual. Mr. Weinstein has begun counselling, has listened to the community, and is pursuing a better path. What does this tell us? Well, most telling is the admission that Mr. Weinstein believed that all of these relationships were consensual. This is noteworthy for two matters. First of all, he isn't denying that the relationship took place. Thus, it is highly likely that he is admitting to acts of infidelity with regard to one or both of his two marriages. This, of course, evidences a lack of empathy for the ex-spouse and the soon-to-be ex-spouse. It also showed at the time, yet again, his sense of entitlement. Secondly, an uninformed listener might hear the use of the word believes and think, oh sure, he thought they were consensual, with a shaken head of disbelief. But here is the rub. Weinstein did, and will continue to do so, from his narcissistic perspective, believe that they were consensual, because his narcissistic perspective makes him believe that he's entitled to anything that he wants. No means yes. History's revised, and these people did go along with it, and their protestations weren't real protestations, and he has to control everything. Nobody refuses him. At the time, his spokesperson naturally denied any suggestion of criminality, not that that did much good ultimately, and as Mandy Rice Davis stated in the Profumo affair, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But not only is this careful management of his advisors, Weinstein will and continues to believe that he's done nothing wrong because he's unaccountable in his world. The final sentence about pursuing a better path is typical deflection and very much in the mould of the "but I can change," as people are invited to consider him to be a lost and damaged soul who needs guidance and therapy. It's just facade management. However, this is what the carefully staged management spokesperson said on his behalf, but how did Mr. Weinstein respond since the explosion of these revelations back in 2017? When leaving his daughter's home to get into a vehicle to whisk him away, presumably to the waiting private jet described earlier, he was reported as stating, "And you know, I've always been loyal to you guys, not like those fucking pricks who treat you like shit. I've been the good guy." This sentence packs so much of his narcissism in. It is hugely interesting. Number one, I've always been loyal to you guys. He's convinced he's a decent person, and he's also seeking sympathy with his comment. Further evidence of his delusions, his delusional thinking, and his bid for fuel, and to assert control. 2, not like those fucking pricks who treat you like shit. Deflection, by lashing out at other individuals. Smearing and provocation towards the unnamed pricks. 3, sense of victimhood. I'm the decent fellow here who has always been good to you lot. And look at how I'm being treated now. 4, I've been the good guy. As ever, the facade fights to remain in place, and the obsession with being seen as a decent person continues. 5, sense of entitlement. I've been loyal to you, and now in my hour of need, you'd better support me. 6, sense of treachery, referring to how he is being vilified. When I originally posted the article about this, I used an image which showed Weinstein giving the finger on both hands as he's attended his lawyer's office. That's hardly the behaviour of a contrite individual who has listened to the community and is pursuing a better path. No, that demonstrates again compartmentalisation, hypocrisy, aggression. At that point, that was a narcissist who was fuelled. He had several supporters with him when that picture was taken, and when confronted, no doubt, by a press pack, this challenged him, and Weinstein, feeling fuelled and confident but needing to assert control over those individuals, engaged in a provocative act to assert control and draw more fuel. Whilst at his daughter's house back in 2017, she apparently telephoned the police, concerned that her father was suicidal. The repeated wounding that he felt as allegation after allegation landed against him from people he regarded as loyal and under his control, or once were regarded as such, began to smash holes in his construct, making him, although he didn't know why, feel desperate, like his world was literally caving in on him. Add to this the condemnation from other members of the industry, the fact that BAFTA suspended his membership, that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences was considering his role and condemned his behaviour, all added up to Mr. Weinstein facing massive wounding. Rather ironically, even Hillary Clinton, a narcissist herself, has stated that the funds Weinstein had donated to her presidential campaign would be donated to a charity instead. Once again, members of the narcissistic brethren only end up looking out for themselves. Little wonder that he felt suicidal as his fuel dwindled and he was being repeatedly wounded, and he was described as being in meltdown. Starved of fuel as hitherto reliable appliances turned off the provision of fuel as they turned their backs on him, he was also being repeatedly wounding, plunging him towards a fuel crisis. And it was little wonder that he commented, "Guys, I'm not doing okay, but I'm trying. I got to get help. I'm hanging in. I'm trying my best." At that juncture, there was a moment of rare honesty in terms of him admitting that he wasn't doing okay, but once again his narcissistic self-defense mechanism kicked in as he referred to needing to get help, that he's hanging in there. Brave little soldier. And he was trying his best. So, of course, people were expected to feel sorry for the man. Give him a break. He's realised he's made mistakes and he's going to improve himself. No, he is not, and he never will. It's telling that when Weinstein met with executives of the film company before they dismissed him, he stated that he wanted to go into heavy therapy and counselling in order to make a comeback. That is what matters to Weinstein. Him. He's not going to go into therapy to be a better person. He's doing it because he has sufficient cognitive function and awareness, and no doubt suitably advised, that that's what he ought to do. His facade management aspect of his narcissism recognises that that's an appropriate thing to do for the assertion of control. He's doing it in order to draw fuel, as part of a massive pity play, and also for the purposes of asserting control over people. And he's only doing it in the expectation of staging a comeback. That, of course, following his subsequent conviction, ain't going to happen. The executives, however, were not persuaded at the time and refused his request. At the time, of course, it was noteworthy that he never said sorry, that he never apologised, and that he had never been contrite. In his business dealings, Weinstein had attracted a reputation for ruthlessness and fits of anger. He was described that he once put a New York Observer reporter in a headlock while throwing him out of a party. On another occasion, Weinstein excoriated director Julie Taymor and her husband during a disagreement over a test screening of her movie Frida. He was notorious for re-editing several Asian films and dubbing them English, much to the chagrin of the directors, and that he would repeatedly cut movies because it was his way or the highway. In a 2004 newspaper article in New York Magazine, Weinstein appeared somewhat repentant. Of course, this was false contrition for his often aggressive discussions with directors and producers. However, a Newsweek story of October 13, 2008 criticised Weinstein, who was accused of hassling Sidney Pollack on his deathbed about the release of the film The Reader, lack of emotional empathy, assertion of control. After Weinstein offered $1 million to charity, the accusation could be proven, which shows his arrogance and lack of accountability, journalist Nikki Fink published an email sent by Scott Rudin on August 22nd asserting that Weinstein harassed Anthony Minghella's widow and a bedridden Pollock until Pollock's family asked him to stop. In September 2009, Weinstein publicly voiced opposition to efforts to extradite Roman Polanski from Switzerland to the United States regarding a 1977 charge that he drugged and raped a 13-year-old, to which Polanski had pleaded guilty before fleeing the country. Weinstein, whose company distributed Roman Polanski Wanted and Desired, a film about the Polanski case, questioned whether Polanski committed any crime, demonstrating a lack of emotional empathy for the victim, which prompted Los Angeles County District Attorney Steve Cooley to insist that Polanski's guilty plea indicated that his action was indeed a crime and that several other serious charges were pending. It also just demonstrates Weinstein's arrogance, lack of emotional empathy, and sense of entitlement to pronounce in such a way. But was it always so bad about Weinstein? Well, he was involved in activism. He was active on issues such as poverty, AIDS, juvenile diabetes, and multiple sclerosis research. Until October 2017, he served on the board of the Robin Hood Foundation, a New York City-based non-profit that targeted poverty and co-chaired one of its annual benefits. He'd been critical of the lack of control laws in universal health care in the United States. He was a long-time supporter and contributor to the Democratic Party, including the campaigns of President Barack Obama and presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and John Kerry. He supported Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign, and in 2012, he hosted an election fundraiser for Obama at his home in Westport, Connecticut. That serves as a useful reminder to you all that just because somebody engages in charitable work, philanthropy, donations, fundraising for charitable and political causes, it doesn't mean that they're a decent person. Indeed, you can all recognise that Weinstein is an odious sex offender, an individual who has behaved on a repeated occasion with a lack of emotional empathy, a sense of entitlement, no boundary recognition, operating in a manipulative way to assert control and gain fuel. The activity on issues such as poverty, AIDS, juvenile diabetes, etc. is all part of the facade. So, what you have to understand is that many famous narcissists will engage in what looks like supposedly philanthropic and beneficial activity, but it's all about the generation of the facade. It's important that you understand this. Of course, ultimately, Weinstein then ended up being charged with rape, criminal sex act, sex abuse and sexual misconduct involving 2 women, and was found guilty of criminal sexual assault in February 2020 and was sentenced to 23 years imprisonment. He still faces a criminal trial in Los Angeles. There is a wealth of material about Weinstein, and even more could be provided with regard to his behaviour at trial, turning up with the Zimmer frame for the purposes of eliciting sympathy, that he portrayed himself as a broken and ill man, all part of a facade which was generated to try and elicit sympathy. He has never shown any contrition. He has not shown any genuine contrition. He has not demonstrated any emotional empathy for the scores of individuals that he evidently abused. And in the circumstances, it's very clear that Weinstein is, or at least was, of Hollywood, but he very much remains a narcissist. But what type of narcissist is he? I've explained that he hits many indicators that demonstrate that he's a narcissist by reason of his sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy, lack of accountability, grandiosity, haughty behaviours, extensive manipulative behaviours, no boundary recognition, and a variety of significant aspects of the narcissistic dynamic. But where does he sit? He isn't a greater because he doesn't have the awareness. Certainly he has the wealth, fuel matrix, to sit within that, but he doesn't have the out-and-out Machiavellianism, nor the high level of charisma associated with it and awareness, and therefore he's not a greater. He exhibits 1 or 2 flashes of the lesser in terms of the manifestation of ignited fury, but he was not known for extensive physical violence, destruction of property. He's obviously of a reasonable cognitive function, and therefore lesser would not be appropriate. Moreover, he operated a facade. He operated a facade of brilliance, supposed benevolence. He was not an overly compassionate individual. And therefore, because he operated this facade, his attacks invariably took place behind closed doors, nobody else there. So the facade aspect of his narcissism governed his behaviour in that regard. It wasn't that he knew that what he was doing was wrong and he had any genuine contrition or compassion, but his narcissism kept it on the down low in order to preserve control and to avoid threats to his facade. Weinstein operated very much in the moment. All of this points to him being a mid-range narcissist. Given the absence of lesser behaviours, lower mid-range is not appropriate. Middle mid-range is tempting, although type A is not appropriate because he's not of an overwhelming angel, and he certainly isn't anodyne. He does have a bit of the crybaby about him and utilises pity plays, but isn't too close to middle range type B because of the arrogance that he exhibits, the total lack of contrition, the fact that his facade is really built upon grand gestures of philanthropy and assistance and grand gestures of superiority. Basically, I can do what I like because I'm Captain Successful. He had a degree of charm, but not extensive. But he did have an extensive fuel matrix, financial success, considerable arrogance, delusions of grandiosity, and ultimately the aggressive streak in private fits more with the haughty, arrogant behaviours that one would be associated with an upper mid-range. That's also supported by the level of success that he enjoyed. Upper mid-rangers don't always use pity plays, but they can do, because after all, they are mid-range narcissists. And it was really only doled out by him extensively when the chips were down, i.e. when he was getting a real battering in October 2017 and thereafter, when the allegations came out about his behaviour. And he continued to engender a sympathy symphony with his court appearances, presenting as a broken man. In part, that was his narcissism doing that to try and engender sympathy, but it was also a consequence of the position that he found himself through the repeated wounding that he was being subjected to, his fall from grace, his loss of status, the removal of his position from the company, the fact that he was stripped of an honorary CBE, the fact that he lost positions on various boards, etc. And therefore, the consequences of this were that his health was declining and has been declining because of the repeated wounding that he's been suffering and the threats to his status. Of course, his second wife divorced him following the allegations, and all of this has meant that the man who once enjoyed a substantial fuel matrix through many, many people within the industry lost much of that. They've turned their back on him, and that is repeated wounding for him on a near daily basis. And therefore, his appearance as crushed was in part as a consequence of that, and also his narcissism utilising that in order to try and assert control over the judge and jury and other people, to also assert control over them and gain fuel. But it's very, very clear that Harvey Weinstein is indeed a narcissist. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.